Welcome, everyone, to the second episode of the Fired Up and Plugged In podcast powered by Emergency Reporting. This is the podcast for all 21st century fire and emergency medical services personnel. I'm Tom Lewis, Enterprise Training Manager and podcast producer. Our topic today is organizational intelligence and the role high-quality, trustworthy data has in setting and achieving organizational goals. Our host is retired Fire Chief Randy Bruegman. During his 40-year career in local government, Chief Bruegman was the president of the International Association of Fire Chiefs from 2002 to 2003, and he also served as the president of the board of directors of the Center for Public Safety Excellence from 2004 to 2017. We are grateful to have him as a member of Emergency Reporting's Customer Advisory Board. Our guest today is Emergency Reporting's Chief Executive Officer, David Nokes. David has been with Emergency Reporting since 2011 and previously served as General Manager prior to becoming CEO. He is also our visionary, and in today's part 2 of our discussion on organizational intelligence, he will discuss the critical role data plays in any modern organization. David, it's good to have you back. We're glad you're with us today, everyone, so let's start the podcast.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Tom. Appreciate that. And David, welcome back.
Yeah,
appreciate
thanks.
you coming back for a second part of the podcast. You know, on the first podcast, we had the opportunity to explore what emergency reporting and you specifically as the chief executive are using, kind of the strategy that you're using to move your organization and position it for the future. And that revolved around a term that you, I think, had invented called ADAMS. And that was accelerate, transform, optimize, maximize and scale your organization for the future. And you know, we've heard a lot of feedback from chiefs from across the country and different levels in their organization of how that has applicability to the fire and emergency services. So we appreciate you sharing that because I think that has some applicability, like I said, with anybody that's running an organization. I think it's pretty unique. But we also talked about bringing you back and just to kind of explore, you know, where the future of the fire and emergency services are going. And I had the opportunity to co-chair the 21st Century Fire and Emergency Service Report for the ICMA and CPSC. And two of the critical issues that wanted to focus on today were the robust use of data and technology and how that may impact the fire and emergency services over the next 30 years. And so since you're in that field and you're working in it every day and have been for quite a while, I'd really like to gain your perspective on how you see that impacting organizations, not only the fire and emergency services, but others as we move forward. When we talk about such things as software as a service and BI and artificial intelligence and the Internet of Things, all of those things have a role to play in our organizations. So really like to get you to begin to explore that as we move our organizations forward in the future.
Sure. Thanks, Chief, and thanks again for having me. This is a topic I think I could talk on for hours, right? And it's really amazing to watch technology drive into this space. There's lots of great examples of people leveraging data in certain industries to actually make decisions. And then where we're headed, the interconnectivity of things, the interoperability of things, we're going to be inundated with source data from places that I would say, haven't even thought of yet, right? And so this is a topic that's really important to me. It's a topic that's important to the company, and so I'm excited to participate. It's I think we're in the infancy stages of a real shift in how data is going to be used for the fire service.
So from a fire chief's perspective, you know, we're going to have this pool of data that we've never had before. How do you see that we can begin to utilize that at the local level to really start to impact, you know, how we do our business?
Well, the first part that I've seen, and just talking with any fire service, right, is any fire department, any one of our customers, is that the quality of the source data, right? And so there's this idea of garbage in, garbage out, right? Right now, I think people are working through the problem of what is that data and where is it coming from? And probably the second thing I see a lot of is that I see lots of agencies sort of take the data and say, well, this is how I want to represent my data, right? And so you have this massaging that occurs. And so I think there's a lot of that going on, and I think it's people are just trying to tell their story, right? So in emergency reporting, what we try to do is we try to get as close to the source data as we possibly can, spend a lot of time figuring out how to have the most quality, and then try the least amount of massaging, if that makes sense, right? Because if you're overlaid on top of the source data and you can lift it and immediately represent it, it's much different than if it gets sent to a person who massages it and sends to another person who massages it, and by the time it gets there, it's hard to know where you started, if that makes sense. And we spend a lot of time at emergency reporting trying to just dive into that source data and make sure that we're, the least amount of steps away from that as possible. The fire service has always been producing data. I mean, think about how long has NFIRS been in place? How long has NEMSIS been in place? The data has been collected, right? But I think we're on the edge now of, okay, now that I have all this data, what do I do with it, right? I just want to encourage people, stay close to the source, right? Understand the source and make sure that the quality of the input is in alignment with where you want to actually take and tell your story.
Yeah, I think visualization is a really critical element, because I know as a fire chief, you would, I mean, when you have to do a report for council or your board of supervisors, and you have to, if you're going to do a presentation, especially when you're asking for maybe a new station or whatever it is, but it may be just a post-fire incident analysis. You have to be able to visually show that so that they can win. And because data is difficult sometimes to articulate, and so if you can visualize, it's critical.
It is. I mean, one of the things we did this last year to try to enable fire departments to have those tools is we launched Microsoft Power BI embedded inside the application. So we call it BI Basic. And what that ultimately does is it takes a section of the system, a module per se, right? And we lift up the data and we visually represent it on behalf of the fire departments. Not everybody has a BI analyst at their fingertips, right? Some of the customers we serve are small volunteers. Now, when you get into the larger careers, they have different needs, right? They have maybe that visualization, or almost like a data artist that can actually take that source data and represent it well so that the story can be told. So we made sure that as a company that we facilitated as many fire departments as we could with the BI basics, so that they don't have to sort of dream up of how that data should be visualized. And we have it across several of the key operational modules inside the system, from incidents to EMS to training to prevention. So again, when you start to move up into places where fire departments have those resources, now they have a different type of story and a different need. They're looking for maybe the ability to get the raw data from the source, right? Sort of an ad hoc. And I'm proud to say that in the next 30, 60 days, we're going to be pushing out an ad hoc solution. So we're trying to stay right there with the group, with our customers, and trying to give them all the tools they need to be able to tell their story.
So where do you see, I mean, when we look, and this is not going to be 30 years, it's going to probably be in the next 10. It's already happening. But when we look at smart buildings, information that we can actually download into reporting systems from our vehicles when they've been involved in a crash, wearables that we are already wearing that actually can transmit medical data from our persons. So all of that has to be captured. All the apparatus that we drive has thousands of data points in it, in and of itself. So as we look down 5 to 10 years in the future, how do we begin to capture that data? Because that is real-time data, but it has relevance from a reporting standpoint.
Sure. I'll tell you, companies need to make sure that they're investing in the tools and the infrastructure to be able to support that. I think fire departments need to start to lean into investing in those types of scenarios where those data sources exist, right? So that's just going to start inundating us. And again, we've been working at emergency reporting for a long time on building the infrastructure. So we have a pretty robust API that overlays across the system, so that we're ready to catch data from where it comes from. It's also important that we have to have a flexible enough system that's configurable not only for the customers, but even for our technology groups, so that we can quickly move and adjust ways to catch data, right? So you mentioned buildings. When buildings start talking to systems, you have to have fields for that data to land in. It's got to be able to come into a spot, right? And then at that point, it has to be able to then move from there into BI and reporting. And so, again, that's another thing I'm real proud of. We've made investments in that for a long time. Since 2012, we've been building out the ability for our system as a platform to be able to consume data from lots of sources, right? Fire departments, I think we're just on the edge of it. I mean, you could even have a smart hydrant if you really want to get down to it, right? You have smart apparatus. You can have, there was a fire department chief that I spoke with that said, hey, could Alexa actually call 911 when it detects a temperature change? So a structure fire, a home fire. Could Alexa actually be the first one calling when it detects a massive temperature change? If you think about it, it would just need to be able to tell the temperature like a thermostat in your house, right? And if it sees a rapid change in interior temperature, why isn't Alexa calling 911 and dispatching, right? Those sorts of things are for sure coming. And, you know, I think fire departments have to be ready for that. They have to embrace it. They have to invest in making sure that their teams understand it. And I still go back to data, garbage in, garbage out. We got to make sure that we control that on the inside and make sure that we're really understanding what data is making it into the system. Otherwise, the story doesn't get told correctly, right? We have, I'll give you a good example. We have several customers that as we launched BI groups, so we have the ability now to assign several fire departments to kind of an echelon or an upper level parent-child type relationship, right? And as they started to aggregate that data and as they started to look at it, they said, hey, something's wrong with your system. And it's like, actually, that data is really in that one over there, right? That's how they put that data in, and it started to make it so that the story wasn't being told the way that the chief of the county or the parent, right, wanted to tell the story. The data that was migrating up was now messing with the result because of how data was input in the system.
Yeah.
What I like about the Internet of Things, what I like about buildings talking and that is that that is the data. That is the source data. The source data is in, and that's just what it is, right? And if anybody changes it there, then you know, you might have to have some oversight or some quality control. Yeah. But the fact is, that's the data that came across, and you eliminate that aggregation problem, right?
Yeah. Yeah, I know that's one of the identified areas that needs of improvement that was in the 21st century report is just, you know, the garbage in that we put. We don't do a really good job of reporting in the fire and emergency services to our own detriment. We basically, as we've said for a long time, we pencil whip run reports, especially because, you know, they're kind of a pain to fill out sometimes, right? Even though it's automated, it takes time, and if you're running 20 calls a day, you don't want to capture every little piece of information, so you just go down. But that plays out down the long term about garbage in, garbage out. You're not really telling your story, and data is about telling your story, isn't it?
For sure. And you know, that's another reason interoperability is important to emergency reporting, is that we know that the people that are filling out the reports would much rather be on a rig driving 64 miles an hour down a street heading to save lives, right? They're heroes. They don't like to sit and do reports. So anytime we can facilitate interoperability, or the data is in and the report is 80% completed, those are competitive advantages for us. But really, it also improves data integrity. It gets people in the fire service out doing what they joined the fire service for, right? And then you ultimately have a higher quality data experience when it's all said and done. So you know, we're going to continue to make investments there because it's just the right thing to do for all parties, all stakeholders, right? Even the communities that are being served. It's just it's important for us to try to have as much data integrity and quality as we can.
So as advanced BI kind of rolls out over the next several years, and this may take you know, another decade or so, but we've already seen the emergence of artificial intelligence and being able to analyze just massive data much quicker than we can as humans, even with computer assistance. How do you see that playing out, not only in the fire and emergency services, but just throughout the technology field?
Well, first off, I want to say that we believe in it so much. We've invested in an entire organization inside emergency reporting to start leaning into that subject matter. So most recently, I hired a chief data officer, right? And we built an organizational structure around that role so that we can start to make sure that we are on the cutting edge of what that is, right? I can see that AI, as fast and as computational fast as it is, it still needs fire service eyes. It still needs somebody to interpret, right? And so we want to make sure to always, again, get the data, right, and help machines learn how best to serve the communities that we're, in managing and protecting. So AI is, if I had to sit there and say, if I had to categorize them where we want to make sure and spend our time, right? First, we got to give people the tools to actually visualize the data. Second, we got to give them the tools to make sure data quality and data integrity is here. Third, we have to help the fire service analyze that data, right? We have 2 data scientists that we brought on board just to start to look at data. Emergency reporting, we have, upwards of 60 million incidents in a database. I promise you there's life-saving measures inside of there, right? We have, 2.5, 3 million apparatus. There's a lot of things inside of our system that we can start to help the fire service better understand, whether they're, again, a small volunteer or a big enterprise fire department. So AI is something that I think will constantly change, and it only is effective if you solve the other steps in between first, right? AI, if you have AI on bad data, it's just going to give you bad artificial intelligence, right? And so we got to try to make sure that the entire pipeline before you get to that is in a healthy state. If that makes sense.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah. I mean, it's the old garbage in, garbage out. I mean, if you're putting in bad data and you analyze it, and I've had that experience as fire chiefs where I'm looking at, our response data based upon a visualization, and I know that we can't get from point A to point B in what the data is telling us.
Sure.
And sometimes you just know that because you've lived it, but other times if you're relying on the analytics to tell you, and that's all you're going off of, it can get you in trouble. And there's been fire chiefs that have gotten themselves actually terminated because they have presented information that was then later found to be inaccurate, unfortunately.
And that happens, right? It happens in the business world as well, right? So again, when we take in data and we massage that data to try to understand what we're even looking at, and then we go to lift it and tell our story, you can have 1 decimal point that can create a different answer, right? Right. So that's why I wanted to start this conversation by, look, you have to get as close to the source data. You have to automate that source data as much as you possibly can so that you're looking at its rawness, right, before you start to move it around. We had another scenario where inside of our system, when you export your NFIRS report, we try to do all the heavy lifting so that you cannot export an NFIRS report that doesn't meet NFIRS, right? And so there's times where someone would, they complete their month export, but there's still 3 or 4 calls that they want to take a look at that happen right at the end of the month, and then they forget to export those calls later on. They just get going, and the next thing you know, it's like, hey, FEMA, the amount of incidents in FEMA is different than the amount of incidents in emergency reporting, and it's like, okay, well, again, it's a process, right? It was a process operational issue. So, I think fire chiefs, just myself, emergency reporting, anyone in leadership, anyone that's in this role has got to, first off, believe that data matters, and second off, try to get to the source data, and third off, try to minimize or overlay as close as you can to the source data so you can get as close to the truth, right? I like where we're headed with interoperability because it eliminates a variable, right? It's just, there's the data, now let's put something on top of it and see how it looks, right?
Yeah, and I think as we move into the future and the more data points that we're getting automated, the better information that we're going to get, and it may change the story that we tell today.
I think it will. I think it'll be a different you'll have different ways to think about resource use and different ways to think about resource need and different ways to think about that across time, right? And how time applies, what time of day, time of month, like that sort of thing, right? All of that will end up starting to play into it as we start to get better interoperability with other systems.
Yeah, if you look at all the thousands of data points that play into an incident, play into a medical emergency, and then be able to analyze that to say how could we have intervened from a risk reduction standpoint to prevent that from happening in the first place. I mean, we have typically looked at it from if something happens, give us a call and we'll take care of it.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And I think we're shifting our focus in our abilities to be able to go, we anticipate these things are going to happen, and we're going to do these things to prevent them from happening in the first place based upon the data that we've already amassed, millions and millions of incidents previously. And I think that's where we have power to really change our organizational intelligence to make an impact on the future of, our residents that we serve. And
yeah, it's much better to analyze and mitigate the risk before it happens, right? And then you're constantly reducing that risk. And so as you start to get into that analysis phase, that's why I say it's source data. It's make sure and give them a basic representation, and then that analysis phase is where we're going to spend the next season of our life, is that making sure that we can tell the story for fire departments who can't afford to have an analyst, right? That we want to make sure and be able to lift up and say, this is how you should be looking at your data, right? And this is what we see in your data. And I think that's going to become powerful. And then as that starts to move, then I feel a little bit more confident about what AI is, right? Because then we're actually looking at it and we know that the data integrity is there and the data quality there and the source data is there.
Yeah, I agree. Well, anything that you would like to, finish up with today?
Well, I just want to, again, thank you, right? It's important for us to find ways to tell our story and how we're helping the fire service. We have almost 110 employees working in emergency reporting today, and they come to work every day trying to figure out ways to make all of these processes just a little bit easier, whether it's through technology or process, et cetera. And again, we continually strive to have the world's best customer service. As we've grown, and we service almost 8,000 fire departments now, it's been an amazing journey. And so I just want to thank you and Tom for setting up this whole engagement, because I think it's important for our customers in the market and the fire service to understand more about who emergency reporting is and where we're headed.
Okay, well, thanks, David, for joining us for our second podcast, and we'll probably reach back out to you in about three or 4 months and have you back if you're up for that.
I'll be up for it. Let's do it.
All right, thank you. Appreciate it.